To have George and John Rinnert speaking on the same day is pretty darn cool to me. So up next, John Rinnert. John's been a journalistic Christian Science practitioner for what, 10, 13, 12, 14 years now. Time flies. He loves turning his thought towards the words of God, the great shepherd that feeds his flock. With increased understanding of truth, life, and love. You met John's wife, Lauren, and now John can use the same line that I use, as we are both Christian Science nurses' aides. John and his wife, Lauren, which met a recent transplants here to Texas. Along with John's love for the scriptures and the writings of Mary Baker Eddy, he enjoys bicycles, motorcycles, and anything on two wheels. He enjoys fly fishing and tin car. Yeah. And y'all have to look that up on your own. It's pretty cool. In playing soccer. So I am pleased to introduce John Rinnert. What I particularly, this kind of had one more thing. Kim used the words defense and dignity of our cause, but Kim didn't know what the title of your talk was. So I thought that was pretty awesome. So.
And he mentioned some things that are going to be in this one. So. Very, very cool.
Yeah, it really is pretty cool.
One line.
Yeah, I keep hearing that today. And just
screw that up.
Welcome, John. John Rinnert, everybody.
So, is this sound okay? Is this okay? Yes? Okay. The ear thing's kind of weird. There's a little feedback? There is a little feedback? Okay. Well, I'll try and talk lower. Okay. Is there a down button? I don't know. So for most of my practitioner career, I lived in Montana. And Montana's sort of out in the boonies. And so, as you can imagine, I really didn't have much of an opportunity to celebrate Christian Science nursing because there weren't any Christian Science nurses. And so now, here I am, living at a facility, married to a Christian Science nurse. And we celebrate what we love. And we love what we know. When we learn about something, when we understand its worth, when we see its worth, we can celebrate it. And that idea of worth and value has been really important to my thought for a long time. And so I'd just like to describe a little bit about why I'm celebrating Christian Science nursing. From going from not knowing anything about it to celebrating Christian Science nursing. I married Lauren for a number of reasons. But I would say that the cake, that the real aspect of marrying Lauren, the most important thing was the quality of her thought. I realized that was going to be such a support for me, but also just a wonderful companion to be around, the quality of her thought. And I've noticed something, that as she's joined the Leaves and trained to become a Christian Science nurse, that quality of thought has only increased. That her thought, I think of it sort of as surgical. It's just really accurate. And it's just really good at detecting what the problem is and providing the solution for that. And so to me, that's why I'm celebrating Christian Science nursing. Because it's meant so much to my life, because I've seen the effect, the environment of what Christian Science nursing does on somebody's thought. And I kind of, a little bit, keep to myself in this community, but just whenever I've interacted with one of the Christian Science nurses, I've just been so impressed with the quality of their thought. And so that's something that we can really celebrate. Now, you also know, if you know anything about me, that I love the days of creation. I think it's always about man's origin. We need to go back to that source material and know who we are, man's origin. And that's where we find about that origin in the days of creation. Now, a couple days ago, my wife came into my office with this big smile with her computer, and she showed me these slides of the days of creation. And I thought they were so brilliant that I wanted to share them with you today. It's a little off topic, but I'll work some things in. Now, the great thing about these slides is that it is the days of creation as interpreted by puppies. And so if you don't know anything about the days of creation, everybody loves puppies. And so this is a nice introduction to the days of creation. So here we go. 7 days of creation, day 1. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Day 2. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. Day 3. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed was in itself. Day 4. And God made 2 great lights. Oops. I'll just hold this. Is this still good? You can hear okay?
Yeah.
Okay. God made 2 great lights. He made the stars also. Day 5. This is my favorite day, by the way. So, and God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life. This is the best one. That may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. Now, he's doing his best. He's not really soaring, but he's up there. He's doing his best. Day 6. God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind. Day 7. On the 7th day, God ended his work, which he had made, and he rested. And he rested. And he rested. Okay, so that gives you a little introduction to the days of creation. My talk today really covers 3 points. Okay, the first point is a comment that I overheard recently regarding Christian Science nursing. The second point is the Exodus journey. And the third point is the defense and dignity of our cause. So point 1. So I was at a Wednesday service recently, a couple weeks ago, and during the testimony portion, someone got up and made a comment. It was a brilliant comment about the need for us when a church member, a fellow church member, was going through a challenge, that there was a need for us to help them. To not leave them alone, but to really go and visit them or care for them and things like that. And it was a brilliant comment. But one of the things that they said was, and he was talking about the resources that somebody had when faced with a challenge. He said you could call a practitioner, et cetera, et cetera. But this is the thing that kind of caught my attention. And in extreme cases, they could go to the leaves. In extreme cases, you go to the leaves. I'm not picking on this person. I don't really know even who it was. They were behind me. I couldn't see who it was. But I want to mention this point because it's something that I think all of us have maybe thought about or just accepted. That you only go to a Christian Science nurse when things get really bad. In extreme cases. But should we be accepting this idea? Does this agree, for example, with the Exodus story? Does it agree with and uphold the defense and dignity of our cause? Well, that's what this talk is all about. Whenever I hear the word extreme, I've begun to kind of get my practitioner feelers out there. And I've begun to be alert to that because Mortal mind, the carnal mind, always operates in extremes. And think about it. More and more, what are we dealing with? Extremism. Okay? So when you think about your challenges, but it's always a question of extremes. Too hot, too cold, too much, too little, too fast, too slow. It's extremes. On the other hand, Mrs. Eddy often talks about, for example, the equipollence of God. She talks about equilibrium and balance. Now, the idea of balance is seen throughout the Bible. It is a very important idea. God demands righteous balance. For example, Proverbs says, "A just weight and balance are the Lord's. All the weights of the bag are his work." Now, balance has a profound influence on our health and supply. Now, these are qualities of thought that first appear on the third day of creation. The grass, the herb, and the fruit tree all present symbols. They are not the appearing of material things. They're the presentation, the appearing of spiritual symbols regarding how God provides and meets our every human need, health-wise and supply. Now, the purpose of the days of creation is to reveal, let there be light. That's probably the most important idea in the days of creation. And Mrs. Eddy asks, was not this a revelation instead of a creation? Okay, so if it is truth's purpose to reveal something, let there be light, what do you think error's purpose is? To hide it. Okay, to hide it, to prevent you from seeing something. Okay, it is error's purpose to hide. One of the characters attempting to hide our health and supply is the third horseman of the apocalypse. Okay, he's the third horseman because he's trying to hide the third day. And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, "Come and see." And I beheld, and lo, a black horse. And he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. Okay. So, the third horseman attempts to hide man's God-given health and supply through the mesmeric suggestions of poverty, famine, and lack. That's why his nature, his color is black. It's the exact opposite of the green appearing on the third day. You think of green and you think abundance. But this is famine, lack, and poverty. Now check it out. He does this through his scales, his balances. Now, the third horseman is a wonderful example of an extremist because his balances are out of balance. We might think of one scale as supply. What would the other scale be? Demand. Okay. We could think of it as the haves and the have-nots. Everything's out of balance. So, maybe, just maybe, the claim that we don't go to a Christian Science nurse until things get really extreme, until things get totally out of balance, maybe this is the influence of the third horseman going through the soil of thought, trying to hide from you man's God-given supply and demand, and supply and health given to you on the third day of creation. It's just a thought to consider. Now, this brings us to the second point in the Exodus story. Now, you're all familiar, I'm sure, with this story, so I'm not going to go through the details, but there's just one thing I want to bring out about it. And it's because it illustrates to us God's practical goodness. Because while the children of Israel may have been passing through a harsh and extreme environment, God's loving provision was anything but harsh and extreme. When did it come to them? When did they get that supply? Daily. Every day. It illustrates God's loving care and provision each and every step of the way. And why is this? And here's a photo of God providing through Moses for the children of Israel in the wilderness. Now, why would God do this? Because it is God's nature to be balanced. And his supply is one side of the occasion, of the balance. What's the other side of the balance? Demand. Okay, now here's the thing about this. There was a demand placed on the children of Israel. What was the demand?
Thou shalt love the Lord thy God and all thy soul.
That was the demand. But why did God provide them with resources in this particular occasion? Because the demand was they needed to leave Egypt. Right? They needed to get out of Egypt. The demand was go out of Egypt. Now, if that's the demand, what if God didn't meet their practical need when they left Egypt? What would that have been like? That would not have been good, right? Would they have been successful about leaving Egypt if they weren't supplied with resources? Absolutely not. Okay, so there was a demand, leave Egypt. The supply was the manna, the water, the shelter, all those different things that God provided for them throughout their journey. And so the Exodus story fundamentally teaches us a very important fact. That when God demands something of us, he also provides us with the resources, the practical resources, needed to meet that demand. That's the nature of things. We need to be aware of both those sides of the equation. God makes demands upon us, but he also gives the practical resources. So, the questions for us to consider right now are, what does God demand of us today? And does Christian Science nursing provide a resource that helps us to meet this demand? So, to discover God's demand, we have to look back to the Exodus story. Specifically, what did it mean for the children of Israel to leave Egypt? Mary Baker Eddy implies that the false mentality mentioned, represented by Egypt, is still with us today. Doesn't she say that? In Science and Health, she says, the lame, the deaf, the dumb, the blind, the sick, the sensual, I wish to save from the educational systems of the pharaohs, who today, as of yore, hold the children of Israel in bondage. So why was Moses called to deliver the children? Does anybody know why they needed to leave Egypt? Very specific. And you were touching upon it with the first commandment. And this is what Exodus says. Let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. So the reason that they needed to get out of Egypt was that there was something in Egypt that was preventing them from worshiping God. Not a place, not a people, but a mentality that was preventing them from serving God. Egypt represents the belief that there is life intelligence, and substance in matter. In other words, it reverses the scientific statement of being. Now, the only way to worship God is by accepting the scientific statement of being. But as long as we are enslaved to the belief that there is life, truth, substance, intelligence in matter, we are going to serve mammon, not God. Today, as in Moses' time, God demands that everyone, and we're not just talking about Christian scientists, but everyone, escape this false belief and make the journey into possess the land of spiritual understanding. This is Eddie quotes, and she says, where fetters fall and the rights of man are fully known and acknowledged. And it is a journey. Can you make the leap from the perspective that there's life and intelligence and matter to the promised land in one leap, in one go? No, it is impossible to make that journey. It's impossible. And so you need those practical resources that help you along that journey. It is not something that is accomplished in a single go. It's not accomplished in a moment, a year, a decade. So think about this. Would the children of Israel made it? Would they have accomplished their goal if they had denied the daily resources that God was providing for them? No. They would have perished. Okay. In other words, they would have failed in their attempt to reach a higher understanding. Okay. Now, those resources were not the end-all and be-all. Okay. They were not it. All right. When they got to the promised land, what happened to the manna? It stopped. Yeah, they didn't need that resource anymore. In other words, when they were able to make that higher demonstration, the resource changed. They began to gather their supply from a higher understanding and a higher source. Let me just give a little example of this from a personal experience. You know, I got into the practice right out of college. I didn't have an opportunity to acquire resources. I didn't have any money. I didn't have anything like that. And again, I married Lauren for a number of reasons, but I did not marry her for her money. She had even less money than I did. You know, and so the question is, well, how in the world, that's a good thing. Did you marry me for my money? No, she didn't. The question is, though, how could we have faith and confidence that we were going to have the resources we needed to be successful on our journey? Well, I think we've come to the conclusion, and we continue to come to this conclusion, that the reason is that we realize that we are in God's way. Meaning that we are striving to be obedient to the demand. And what is the demand? The demand is to live the scientific statement of being. To leave behind this aggressive belief that life and intelligence are in matter. Now, as we've done this, we have found that we have the resources needed to do it. This is an amazing thing. Every once in a while I look at our bank account. I don't know how it's going. Well, I do know how, but humanly speaking, it doesn't make any sense that it would be going on. Recently, this past month or so, we've had some unusual expenses. And so that's demanded resources. Well, just the other day, I got a check from somebody I worked with. Well, they paid double of what I had charged. And so it was just a small little example of when you are striving to be in the way, you have the resources needed. And I think this is important because a lot of people who may feel called maybe to be a nurse or a practitioner or whatnot, they might be struggling. They might be saying, well, how in the world are we going to make this work? Well, they need to understand the Exodus story. There is a relationship between supply and demand. God demands you to work out your salvation in a Christianly scientific manner by leaving behind the belief that there's life and intelligence in matter. I want to make a point, too, that in no way am I saying that the only way that you can do this is to become a journalistic practitioner and journalistic nurse. Absolutely not. You could be an artist, you could be a musician, you could be a businessman, and still being obedient, striving to live the scientific statement of being. But that's the demand. You will get the resources you need. It's amazing what happens. So, this brings us to our final point. The defense and dignity of our cause. This is from a passage in Miscellany. I think I'll just read it because it's really cool. Okay. They sprang from necessity, the logic of events, from the immediate demand for them as a help that must be supplied to maintain the dignity and defense of our cause. Hence their simple scientific basis and detail so requisite to demonstrate genuine Christian science, and which will do for the race what absolute doctrines destined for future generations might not accomplish. Okay, this is wonderful because I knew I was going to use this, but I only discovered that about an hour ago that she uses supply and demand. I had when I was thinking about this passage, I forgot about the supply and demand. So that's pretty cool. So let's break this down a little bit. What are the they referring to? They sprang from, yes, the rules and bylaws of what? The manual. The rules and bylaws of the manual. Now, the only reason that we have Christian Science nursing is because of a bylaw. Article 8, Section 31, Christian Science nurse. So, as part of the they, Christian Science nursing does everything that she says it does. It springs from necessity. It is a help needed to maintain, to defend, and dignify the cause. It is a requisite detail in order to demonstrate genuine Christian science, and it will accomplish what absolute doctrines might not be able to accomplish. So it does all those things, right? So what are the absolute doctrines? What do you think? What do you think those are? What's she referring to? Well, I'm not absolutely sure. But, I'm not absolutely sure, but I have a feeling that she's describing the doctrines found in Science and Health. That those are the absolute doctrines she's referring to Science and Health. Now, there's something that I discovered recently that has really helped to assure my thought that this is a right interpretation. Recently, I was showing somebody my personal copy of the 3rd edition of Science and Health. And like the most recent edition, there is a preface. Now there's a preface both in the 1st and the 3rd editions of Science and Health. Now, in the current edition, who does she dedicate Science and Health to? The current... Yeah, she commits these pages to honest seekers of truth. Okay. Now, in the 1st and 3rd editions, what does she commit these pages to? To posterity. She commits the pages to posterity. Now, we know that Science and Health didn't change. It never changed from the 1st edition to the 256th edition or whatever. It never changed. What did it become? Through all those editions, it never changed. It just became clearer, right? And so her dedication didn't change, it just becomes clearer. So think about that. So what does it mean what is posterity? descendants, children, the race that proceeds from a progenitor, succeeding generations. And so she says back here, it will do for the race, for posterity, what absolute doctrines destined for future generations, for posterity, might not accomplish. What is science and health dedicated to? Posterity, future generations. So that's where I'm drawing this connection. You might think it might be a stretch, but maybe think about it some more, and we'll go from there. So sometimes I've heard Christian scientists say, I have science and health, I don't need the church. In other words, I have the absolute doctrines, I don't need church. I don't need Christian Science nursing. But what does she say here in this passage in Miscellany? She says that these bylaws, the church and nursing, are going to do something for you that maybe the absolute doctrines found in science and health won't be able to do. That's pretty cool. Okay, now when I read this, I'm going to go back to here. When I read this passage, one phrase really stood out, and it was "as a help." That really leapt from the page. And what do you think I thought of from the Bible when I read that phrase, "as a help"? Who do you think I thought of? Eve, exactly. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. And the Lord said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him an help meet for him. Now, was Eve successful? Did Eve fulfill her mission? No, she did not. But at the time, she wasn't able to become a help for mankind. But did this mean that the need went away? No, we know that men need help. We know it. And so that need is with us to this day. Now, we might be able to discern how Eve was supposed to help mankind by looking at her name in Hebrew. Eve means chawa, that's the transliteration, and it means to show or to make known. Okay, so the manual, rules, and bylaws help us by showing something to us, by making something known to us. And isn't that a marvelous description of the Christian Science nurse? Don't they serve to make something known to the patient that they weren't seen before? They're revealing something to them. Very, very cool. Specifically, they're making something known regarding health, care, nourishment, etc. The nurse's practice shows something. Namely, it shows us about defense and dignity. Note what she says. They, what's the they again?
Bylaws.
Rules and bylaws, excellent. They maintain the defense and dignity of our cause. God's provision in the wilderness was for maintenance. Okay? It was not, again, the end-all and be-all. It was to maintain them while they were working things out. Okay? But without that maintenance, without that sustenance, again, would they have been able to work it out? No, they would have broken down. There was such good maintenance that their clothing at the end of the 40-year journey, you remember what the description of the clothing was? What was it? It didn't wear out. Oh my heavens. It didn't wear out at all. It still fit. It was totally maintained. Okay. And this is something that George touched upon. This help. Take care of yourself. That's the maintenance. You need to do that. So the purpose of this maintenance is to defend and dignify the cause. Now, what is the best way for us to defend the cause? What is the only way for us to defend the cause? What do we have to do?
Pray. Prayer. No.
Prayer is again a help to that defense. We have to prove it. We have to demonstrate. That's going to defend the cause. From what? From the suggestions Christian Science doesn't work. God doesn't heal. That's the attack. How are you going to defend yourself from that? Prove it. You got to walk the walk, right? You have to walk the walk. To practically demonstrate the facts that science puts forth, that the absolute doctrines are putting forth. Now, we know that God is a very present help in trouble. We know that man's extremity is God's opportunity. But why did Jesus, on occasion, flee the crowds and escape to the mountains? Why did he do that? Well, he needed a refuge. He needed a practical sanctuary. If he needed a sanctuary, what does that say about you? Do you deny your need for a sanctuary? If Christ Jesus, the Master, the way shower, needed a sanctuary, you better not deny your need for a sanctuary. And this, my fine feathered friends, is exactly what Christian Science nursing does. It provides a sanctuary. And that's the thing about extreme situations. They are very loud. Where one is being bombarded by aggressive sense testimony, fear, discouragement, etc. Sure, I can pray at a 50 Cent concert, but it's a lot easier for me to pray in the sanctuary of my own home. George, I'm very impressed that you were able to pray. Now, Mrs. Eddy tells us something, that we need the ear of our patient, okay? And this is what I've often discovered, is that sometimes I'll start working with somebody and I quickly find out that I don't have their ear. And then I find out that maybe a family member is so fearful that they are just bombarding them with, you need to get to the hospital, you need to get to the hospital. Or the material picture is so great, so impressive, that it's just like they can't hear what's being said. They can't hear the truth. So what do they need? What are they needing there? They need a Christian Science nurse, darn it. They need to go to a facility. They need to go and because what is that Christian Science nurse going to provide for them? They're going to provide just that stillness. They enter a room and it's just calm. Because their thought is calm and still. And then you can get their ear. And then you have a healing. What about dignity? Does it dignify us or the cause to wait until we find ourselves in an extreme situation? Absolutely not. And here is another area where Lauren's really helped me out. She said this a number of times, and for a while I didn't get it, but I think I'm beginning to. She says, what is science, theology, and medicine saying about this? And I think what she's talking about is that every challenge we face arises from the material claims of mortal science, theology, and medicine. For example, through physics, science argues that man is a purely physical being. Chemistry, another science, argues that man's personality and identity are determined by chemical hormones. Theology argues that man is a miserable sinner. Medicine argues that the only solution is through drugs, surgery, and hygiene. So let's define dignity. The quality or state of being worthy, honored, or esteemed. Oftentimes we avoid care, proper care, because we have accepted the theological blunder that man is a fallen sinner, unworthy of God's care and protection. I just don't deserve healing, as often expresses itself in guilt, the feeling I'm guilty and deserve punishment. Here you are trying to have a healing, and you're condemning yourself. You're accepting the arguments of theology. What does it mean when I go to a building and say, well, that building is condemned? What's going to happen to the building? Tear it down. And here you are trying to have a healing, and you're saying, tear me down. I don't deserve the care and protection. What happens when you go to a Christian Science nurse? They restore your dignity to you. Why? By showing you that you deserve care and protection. That's what they're doing. They're showing you you are worthy of care. What a beautiful thing. Isn't that awesome? And so that restores your dignity. Now, there is another definition for dignity, and I think this gets to the real heart of it all. To elevate. To elevate. And so, not only does the Christian Science nurse show you that you are worthy, that you are adored of God, they also serve to elevate the consciousness. And what day of creation does this relate to? My favorite day. Now, this is a very important day. That little puppy has been elevated. It's a very important day because it's the first time in Scripture where life is mentioned. And so it is a description. It is describing life. Now, these heavenly creatures are God's angels, and they soar above the earth. So what are they teaching us? They're teaching us that the only way to experience life is as thought soars above corporeality, not dependent upon material organization, not dependent upon time, but dependent upon God in corporeality. And that's what the nurse serves to do, is to elevate that thought. So, in conclusion, I'm going to turn the page. In conclusion, let's leave today with our hearts filled with celebration, love, and praise for the Christian Science nurse. By recognizing that this Christianly scientific manner of nursing provides us with a tangible sense of God's practical love for us, because it is part of His supply, the resources born of necessity, required to maintain our defense and dignity, and those resources that will accomplish those things that absolute doctrines may not be able to accomplish. Amen.